So the new Sony XP700 is a decent box speaker from Sony. It sounds much better than its predecessor, the Sony XB90, and it has a new, more dynamic looking light feature that looks great either indoors or at night. Overall, the XP700 gets the job done, but naturally, we gotta see how it stacks up to its direct competitor, the JBL Partybox 310. Regarding pricing, the Sony XP700 retails for $450, $50 less than the JBL Partybox 310. Now, even though, yes, you might be tempted to go with the Sony XP700 and save yourself $50, personally, I really feel the extra $50 on the Partybox 310 goes a long way. The Partybox 310 just feels more refined. Regardless, if you want to pick either of these two speakers up, they'll be linked down below, but personally, I would rather pick up the XP700 if it's on sale. And if you want to learn more about either of these two speakers, please watch their full reviews because we're only going to be going over the main differences here. Now, first let's talk about the design of these speakers. Now, both of these speakers have mostly plastic bodies, which can be a scratch magnet if you plan on taking them on the go with you, and they both have metal grills on the front. However, both of these speakers are rocking an IPX4 certification, meaning that if you accidentally leave either of these two speakers outdoors overnight, or if it starts raining during your get-together, a little bit of water isn't going to hurt either of these speakers. Now, both of these speakers are about 2.5 feet tall and they both weigh in around 40 pounds. Now, they both have built-in carrying handles and carrying them around is doable. But the first major standout characteristic about the Partybox 310 is that it has built-in wheels and a retractable handle. So instead of carrying the speaker, you roll it. Now, I don't care how much you deadlift or squat in the gym, being able to just roll the Partybox 310 around is a major luxury that you really miss on the Sony XP700. And finally, I also want to point out that with the XP700, you can't use it with a speaker stand, whereas with the Partybox 310, you can. Next up, there's the light feature on these speakers. Now, the XP700 has a decent looking light feature, and I've also noticed that it has a good backsplashing effect. And through Sony's app, you've got a few different lighting modes to choose from. However, when compared to the JBL Partybox 310, I gotta say the 310 has the better looking light feature here. It's brighter, it's more dynamic, and the app with which you control this light feature is much better than Sony's app. However, if you do decide to use the light feature on either of these two speakers, it's going to take its toll on its battery life. So personally, I recommend that if you're going to use either of these speakers outdoors during the daytime, just turn off the light feature. But now let's talk about the battery lives on these speakers. The XP700 has an advertised battery life of 25 hours, whereas the Partybox has an advertised battery life of 18 hours. But the XP700's advertised battery life of 25 hours is with it playing at 25% volume and with its light feature turned off and with its mega bass feature turned on, which is more important. Whereas with the Partybox, that's with it playing at 50% volume, but with both its light feature and bass boost features turned off. Now, if we were talking about, let's say, the Sony XG500 or JBL Boombox 2 or any other smaller speakers, 25% volume is nothing. But 25% volume on the XP700 is a comfortable listening volume, and having the Partybox 310 playing at 50% volume is like having either the Sony XG500 or JBL Boombox 2 playing at max volume, if not a little more. So overall, real-world use, I expect most people will use these speakers somewhere between 25 to 45% volume. And if that's the case, then these speakers are evenly matched because you can get around 18 hours of playback time out of both of these speakers with their light features turned on and with their bass boost features turned on as well. However, just keep in mind, battery life on both of these speakers really depends on how you use them. If you've got them playing at higher volumes, your battery is going to drain faster. Like I mentioned earlier, if you use the light features on these speakers, it is going to take its toll on the battery life. And if you've got the bass cranked up on these speakers, that's going to take its toll on the battery life as well. However, for those curious, Sony claims that you're going to get 5 hours of playback time out of the XP700 if you've got it playing at max volume with its light feature turned on and with its mega bass feature turned on as well. And the Partybox 310 is along the same lines. But now let's talk about the ports on these speakers. Most importantly, both of these speakers have two 1/4-inch mic/guitar inputs, which could be important for someone who might want to do karaoke or for hosting small events. However, personally, I do prefer the Partybox here because you can directly adjust the bass, treble, and echo on this speaker directly from the control panel up top. Now, there's also some preloaded sound effects up here, but I never use them, but they're there. However, just keep in mind the bass, treble, and echo settings up here strictly affect the mic, not your music. Now, while we're on the topic of this control panel, I do want to quickly point out that the control panel on the Partybox 310 lights up, whereas on the XP700 it doesn't. And just like the wheels found on the Partybox 310, this is one of those small luxuries that you'll miss on the XP700. Next up are the USB-A ports. The Partybox 310 has one, whereas the XP700 has two. Nonetheless, you can charge your own devices if you're out and about, and you can play music off of a USB stick with either of these two speakers. Now, I think it's great that both of these speakers have USB-A ports, but I still wish that these speakers had at least one USB-C port so that you can charge your own devices or use it as a wired connection, because most new phones these days now come included with USB-C cables instead. Next up, both of these speakers have your standard 3.5mm audio jack, so you can use a wired connection with either of them. However, the Partybox has an audio in and audio out jack, so if you've got a spare speaker lying around, regardless of brand, you can just daisy chain it to the Partybox and have them play in sync. However, it is important to point out that neither of these speakers have RCA inputs, which I do think is unfortunate because their predecessors did. So if you're someone that likes to moonlight as a DJ, then you might have to pass on these. But the last thing that I do want to point out here regarding ports is that the Partybox 310 has this 12-volt DC port. So you can hook the speaker up to your car and play music. Now, this port won't actually charge the internal battery, and if you want this cable, you're going to have to buy it separately. It used to come included with the 300, but not the 310. Nonetheless, this is a very niche feature, but it could be a very big deal if you're a constant camper. But when it comes to Bluetooth connectivity, the XP700 is using Bluetooth 5.0, whereas the Partybox 310 is using Bluetooth 5.1. But more importantly, both of these speakers can be connected to two devices at the same time, so you and a friend can both be DJ. They both have zero latency across the board when watching movies or videos on your phone. And when it comes to audio codecs, the Partybox 310 has support for SBC and AAC, whereas the XP700 has support for SBC, AAC, and Sony's own LDAC. But let's talk about actually listening to music with these speakers. Regarding speaker setups, the Partybox 310 has a pair of frontward firing woofers and a pair of tweeters, whereas the XP700 also has a pair of frontward firing woofers, but it has a total of 4 tweeters. There's 3 in front, which you can clearly see right here, and there's one on the back, which is going to bounce sound off of the wall if you've got the speaker placed up against the wall. However, all of these tweeters aren't always firing on the XP700. If you've got the speaker laying down like this, then it'll use these 2 tweeters. Or if you've got it standing upright, then it'll use these 2 tweeters and the one in the back. However, with either of these 2 speakers, whether you've got them laying down flat or standing upright, you're still going to have your left channel and your right channel. These speakers don't turn into a mono speaker if you've got them standing upright. Now, regarding mega bass and bass boost, with the XP700, if you're going to be listening to music, you want to have mega bass turned on, because if not, the speaker sounds very flat. Whereas with the Partybox 310, even with its bass boost feature turned off, it still sounds pretty good. However, the bass boost has 2 levels to it. Now, personally, I think bass boost level 1 sounds best, but if you want more bass, you can always crank it up to bass boost level 2. But finally, with both of these speakers, if you were to use them while they're plugged in, you're going to get a performance boost out of them. They're going to get a little louder, and they're going to have a little more bass. But with all that being said, we're going to jump into the sound test. Both of these speakers are playing while unplugged. The XP700 is playing with mega bass turned on while at 50% volume, whereas we're going to have the Partybox playing with bass boost turned off and with bass boost set to level 1 with the volume set to 55% volume.
of life, doing the things I know, walking the same ways 100 times with the same soul. But do you ever try to puff on the right side, put it up in your mind? But did you ever try to puff on the left side, put it up in your mind? It's gonna be hard. You run, drive, roll your mind. 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 Seeing all the watering fill your eyes, doing the things they know, talking about the same old stories they've heard about the people they think they know. But do you ever try to puff on the right side, put it up in your mind? But did you ever try to puff on the left side, put it up in your mind? It's gonna be hard. You run, drive, roll your mind. You run, drive, roll your mind. You run, drive, roll your mind. You run,
So overall, I like how both of these speakers sound. They both sound fairly open and they both have a good amount of instrument separation. However, I am gonna have to say that the Partybox 310 does sound a little more open than the XP700. But nonetheless, the XP700 has a decent soundstage, and for sure, it sounds much more open than its predecessor, the Sony XB90, which did sound very muffled. But when it comes to sound signature, the JBL does like to put a little more emphasis on the mids, so vocals are a little more prominent on the Partybox 310. Whereas the vocals on the XP700 do sound a little pushed down because Sony does tend to lean towards a warmer sound signature on their speakers. Personally, I do prefer the Partybox's sound signature here, but still the XP700 sounds good, and the important thing here is that the bass on the XP700 doesn't overpower the mids, which is an issue for the Sony XG500. But finally, when it comes to bass, I gotta say that these speakers are evenly matched. They're both going to have no problems shaking the walls in your house, and their bass stays consistently smooth. However, with the Partybox, you've got 3 levels of bass to choose from, and if you do decide to crank the bass on this speaker, the mids continue to stay prominent. However, it is important to point out that with the XP700, you can always go in and adjust the EQ on the speaker through Sony's app, whereas JBL still doesn't allow you to directly adjust the EQ on their speakers. The bass and treble buttons on the control panel on the speaker is strictly for any microphone or guitar you'll have plugged into the speaker, not your music. But finally, there's max volume on these speakers. For the most part, I think most people will use these speakers somewhere between 25 to 60% volume, because if you try to use these speakers at max volume indoors, you're going to get hearing damage, or if you use them at max volume outdoors, you'll most likely get a visit from the cops. But nonetheless, both of these speakers get equally loud off of their internal batteries. However, the Partybox might sound a little louder because it does put a little more emphasis on the mids than the XP700, which could be useful if you plan on using these speakers outdoors a lot. But like I mentioned earlier, if you were to use these speakers while they're plugged in, they'll get a little louder and their bass will punch a little harder. But finally, let's talk about speaker pairing protocols. The Sony XP700 is using Sony's new Party Connect. meaning that you can pair it up to other Sony Party Connect speakers, like either another Sony XP700 and or an XP500. But the thing about Party Connect is that you can pair your large box speakers to your smaller, more portable speakers. So you can pair your XP700 to, let's say, the Sony XG500, XB43, XB33, or even the Sony XB23. Whereas with the Partybox 310, you can only wirelessly pair it up to one other Partybox 310. You can't pair it up to any other Partyboxes or even a Partybox 300. And you also can't pair it up to any of JBL's smaller Party Boost speakers. However, like I mentioned earlier, the Partybox 310 does have that audio out jack, so you can daisy chain any other speaker to it. So there's that. But like I mentioned in the past, I just wish that JBL would just add JBL Party Boost to their Partybox speakers. Overall, the main selling point of Sony's Party Connect is that you can pair your larger box speakers to your smaller, more portable Bluetooth speakers, whereas with JBL, you can't. Now, Sony's Party Connect gets the job done, but it's not my favorite speaker pairing protocol because it's not as easy to use. Sometimes not all of your speakers get paired up, and sometimes you will hear a little bit of stuttering. But with all that being said, both the Partybox 310 and Sony XP700 are solid box speakers that will definitely deliver for your casual users. They both sound good and fairly open, albeit the Partybox does put a little more emphasis on the mids, whereas the XP700 has a slightly warmer sound signature. Both of these speakers have decently long battery lives, but keep in mind their battery lives really is contingent on how you use them. But overall, I still prefer and gravitate towards the Partybox 310 over the XP700 because the Partybox 310 just feels more refined and offers little extra goodies. First off, it has built-in wheels, which just makes transporting this speaker much easier. You can use a speaker stand with it if you want. It has the more dynamic looking light feature. Its control panel up top lights up, which is great for night use. It has that audio out jack, so you can daisy chain any other speaker to it, which is nice. And it also has that 12-volt DC port, which could come in handy for any campers out there. The main weakness of the Partybox 310 is that you can't pair it up to any of JBL's smaller Party Boost speakers, and you can only wirelessly pair it up to one other Partybox 310. Whereas with the XP700, you can pair it up to multiple XP700s, or to an XP500, or to any of Sony's smaller speakers, which is nice. If you made it this far, I guess you enjoyed the video, so hit that like button and get subscribed. It helps out more than you realize. If you want to pick any of the products up mentioned in this video, those will be linked in the description down below, and you can also support the channel by checking out the merch store. But other than that, I'll catch you next time.